Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, July 31st, 2025, and today we are talking about rhizomatous weeds. Those are the ones that just won't quit. Growing compost fodder in the shade and fertilizing raised beds without compost. So let's do it. All right, happy last day of July, everyone. We are officially through 7 full months out of 12. That's kind of wild, right? School is starting up soon for the kiddos in this area. Soccer is starting next week. Premier League soccer starts in just a couple of weeks, and we are fully on the verge of autumn. That's a lot to take in there. The weather folks are even starting to call for a high of 80 degrees or 26.5 degrees Celsius on Friday. What is this, like Christmas? I have been hard at work this week gearing up for late summer and fall. Up until this point, we have kept things fairly simple on the farm this year, focusing on just a few crops while I try and find a balance between this show and farming. But because although I've created lots of content over the years, I've definitely never created content quite to this level while trying to farm. So yeah, it's been interesting trying to figure out how to do those two things. But this week, feeling like I found that balance, I figured why not grow our offerings a little bit more going into the fall. Plus, it is fully just keep planting season when, tired as we all may be, and we almost all are tired, we do still have to keep getting crops in the ground, or we will look up in September and be like, dang it. So in the spirit of that, carrots, arugula, radishes, baby kale, lettuce, all in, more getting started today. It's time to party. Anyway, seeing that it is Thursday, we will continue to catch up on Patreon questions as we normally do on Thursdays. That said, please don't stop asking questions or adding themes or whatever you want to the Patreon page. Those are very helpful, especially as we head into the winter when I have less to talk about in my own gardens. All right, our first Patreon question comes to us from EB, who writes, quote, "Thank you so much for this amazing series. Your show is both inspiring and practical and so fun to learn from. Thank you. My boyfriend and I have a 20 by 20 garden plot in an organic community garden, and this is our first year in the space. Unfortunately, we have inherited some unforgiving weeds, mugwort, and a bit of poison ivy, but thankfully lots of strawberry runners in the mix too. My question is about the mugwort. Individual mugwort stalks are easy to pull by hand, but the problem is that it grows via rhizomes, and it keeps popping up over the entire plot despite how much we hand pick it at the base. Mulch does nothing either. It grows quickly and is constantly encroaching on all of our young vegetables. I am worried it will steal nutrients and water from them, stunting their growth. What is the best way to combat this, or I suppose any relentless rhizome-based weed, naturally, considering we already have crops growing there? Do we just have to keep picking it to eventually kill off the rhizomes over a few years, or is there a better way for such a large space? We only have a few basic garden tools, a few shovels, a pickaxe, and hedge trimmers, but no weed whacker. I don't know if you have experience with this plant in your area too, but we would love any advice you or your audience can share. We are in Zone 7A in central New Jersey, and our soil is thankfully very alive with organic matter and lots of beneficial creatures. Thanks again," end quote. All right, EB, awesome. Thank you for the kind words, and bummer about the mugwort and poison ivy. Members of my family are wildly allergic to it, so when we see it in the garden, it's a bit of a big deal. Luckily, however, poison ivy is a bit easier to get rid of, with gloves on, of course, than mugwort. Mugwort, as you mentioned, isn't too deterred by being pulled because of the amount of energy it stores in its roots. It just kind of keeps putting shoots out. So it's going to take a multi-pronged approach to get rid of mugwort, assuming, of course, you don't want to just take your plot out of production for a year and tarp it to kill that mugwort that way. So one option could be something like burlap ground cover. I'm definitely curious after seeing the experiments that Ben Hartman has been doing with using burlap in place of plastic landscape fabric, which would, if nothing else, at least concentrate your weed efforts to just where the holes are where you inserted the plants. So essentially everywhere that the burlap is, there would be no mugwort coming through in theory, but only through the holes where the plants are that you planted. Then after a year or so of that, the mugwort would, at least in theory, be greatly diminished. You could also take more time to dig down and get those roots, like where the rhizomes themselves, when you are pulling the mugwort, and the more you can reduce the root mass, the less energy it will have to compete. If you can also keep it from ever really getting leaves up, then you will effectively cut off its power supply, which would be the sun. Leaves are solar panels, roots are batteries. Whatever you can do to disconnect those things as much as possible, the better. I would recommend adding to your quite fun and eclectic list of tools a stirrup hoe to just cut it down as soon as it surfaces. Unless, of course, you're working with straw or hay mulches, in which case your hands will be easier, if not the only real option to get them out of mulches. Also, absolutely allow for no seed rain, especially with this crop, meaning you cannot let this one go to seed or it is going to become a major headache, or an even bigger headache, I guess. This may be a plant that you have to deal with for an extended period of time, but as long as you do some of those simple things, the problem should decrease slowly over time. And any weed barriers that you can add below the mulch, such as mulch paper perhaps, could also lend a nice hand. So anyway, I hope that's at least a little bit helpful to your issue. Wishing you a good fall season over there, and hoping July didn't treat the mugwort too kindly. And we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, a crop that grows biomass in the shade? Interesting. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. If you're listening to this, you probably found 5 rare minutes to breathe. But what got pushed back further down the to-do list to make that happen? If it's your CSA newsletter, you're not alone. Farmhand's new newsletter builder was made for busy farmers. It automates weekly emails, drives add-on sales, and makes it easy to keep your customers in the loop without spending hours behind a screen. It launches this summer, but our listeners can request early access now. Visit farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's second Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Tom Welsh, who writes, quote, I have a narrow bed, 4 by 50 feet, on my property line that is heavily shaded. I want to plant a perennial plant solely for the purpose of cutting it and composting. Would northern sea oats be good for this purpose? Are there better alternatives? End quote. Okay, very cool question here. Basically, what is a good perennial to use in a shady area that would produce a decent amount of biomass for compost? So, northern sea oats actually are one of the ones that would come up. So northern sea oats are Chasmanthium latifolium. It's an interesting option for sure. This is a plant that I have notably not grown myself, but in theory could grow. It grows in Kentucky. In fact, it technically grows from Texas all the way up to Pennsylvania, which is quite a broad range and notably not very northern, unless you, of course, are in Mexico, in which case, touche. Actually, the reason for the name apparently was a misclassification that related it to a different sea oat that grew further to the south. That confusion is why it is also referred to as inland or woodland sea oat as well. Now, in some ways, this particular plant seems like the perfect option for what you're referring to. It grows well in the shade, maybe even slightly preferring shade to full sun. So check. It grows a decent amount of biomass. Check. It's a perennial, which is what you were after. So check there too. However, my one hesitation here, depending on how close this crop would be to your other beds or garden beds or whatever, is that it could be a nightmare plant depending on how well you manage it. This is a plant that goes to seed fairly easily, making a notably lovely option for cut flower growers. But that means the risk there is weeds, more of it, in places that you don't want it. Take it from the man who maintains living pathways that oftentimes even happy plants will find a way to go to seed in your garden bed. So you have to have a good plan for managing it and you have to stick to that plan. And if you can't, you have to have an efficient way to either mow it down or get rid of the seeds or deal with the seedlings. However, in some ways, I do like this idea. I like that you could potentially get some mulch or compost fodder from it, assuming it does not need a lot of fertility itself to continuously produce said mulch of compost fodder. You could potentially sell some of it in cut flower bouquets if that's your thing, which gives it a pretty cool dual purpose. And I mean, making use of shady areas with a lush green plant feels like a huge win. You've got me thinking about this one for around our house where we are supposed to be landscaping, but are really just land ignoring, which is an easy approach, but has a slightly less desirable look overall. My only fear is that this particular plant, the northern sea oat, could spread if you do not manage it, having it up against the garden, like I mentioned, if that's where this garden bed is in particular. Another crop you could potentially consider is comfrey. It will not grow quite as well in the shade, but it will grow some. And if you get the right varieties, it will be a significantly lower risk to the garden. Or you could do a side-by-side to trial to evaluate which produces the most biomass in a year. The one that wins gets a stay. The one that loses, well, it will have to wear the jersey of the opposing crop's favorite team, as is customary. And then it will have to die and be replaced. Also customary. I'm not sure there are better options in terms of biomass for shady areas than the northern sea oat. From what I can tell. Though feel free to let us know in the comment section, listeners and viewers, if there's anything that comes to mind. One other, perhaps outside of the box option, is to grow mushrooms in that area, like Winecap stropharia. Pile the wood chips, let the stropharia go to town, use the decomposed wood chips as compost for next year, and then top that bed back off with fresh wood chips. That said, I do have some issues or some concerns with Winecap stropharia that I plan to talk about or explore at some point, and we'll do that later. Anyway, interesting idea, and also might be worth looking into some of the woodland flower species out there that could be used for cut flowers if you want to make a little extra revenue from that space, or just make a little bonus beauty. All right, otherwise, comment section, you do your thing. It's break time, and when we come back, fertilizing raised beds without compost. Be right back.
Mike here, shades of green in the Waikato, New Zealand. It's -2 this morning, but you're standing here in a t-shirt and shorts, a Savo. Only one thing that can mean, and them daffodils tell the story. Spring is almost here, and soon this flower farm is going to get right busy. Catch you later. Hooroo.
Our last Patreon question of the day, which it feels good to finally be in the July questions, comes to us from Emily Jones, who writes, quote, "Raised beds. My partner has been commenting about removing ours on the farm for years, but I like them and think as we age, having produce higher up is a benefit. What are some pros/cons, and do the benefits outweigh the negatives? Also, what is the best way to increase nutrition in these beds? We normally add compost, but as our garden has expanded over the years, we seem to have less and less to spare. At the end of each year, we usually fill with fallen leaves, zone 5B, and cover until we add a thin compost layer and plant in the spring. Should we cover crop/chop and drop? Thoughts?" End quote. Okay, so great questions here. Some of the pros of raised beds is indeed that they are raised up in the air. So that is a better working height and definitely, as you said, going to be nice as you age. Raised beds can be excellent areas for things that may be harder to maintain in an in-ground space. A great example of that would be like perennial herbs. These often get neglected in the ground and taken over by weeds. Having them in raised beds gives some division to the garden beds and the herb beds. Another advantage could be heat. In the spring, they will warm up faster, especially for you there in 5B. Though in the summer, they could get too warm. I mean, here everything has been too warm, so raised beds probably would have been like a good place to cook a potato. But that warmth in the spring allows for much earlier plantings of certain crops. I sometimes daydream about having raised beds just for small garden trials, so I can test an idea in a small space before taking up bed space with it out in the garden. So that's a potential positive as well, especially for the nerds. The disadvantage can be they take some maintenance, replacing the boards, for instance, but also additions of compost, like you mentioned, and other mulches, plus hand weeding, etc. Maybe they are in the way or not as attractive as they once were too, so that could be a disadvantage. They were in a good spot, for instance, when you initially laid them out, and now they are just kind of a pain to have to mow around. As for adding nutrition that isn't compost, sure, I think cover crops are a great option here, especially leguminous ones such as peas or crimson clover, etc. Those are relatively easy to terminate and will impart some nitrogen on the growing area, or you could grow a legume with rye over winter for a mulch, though you can't just chop and drop that. That would have to, you'd have to have a plan for effectively terminating it in the spring before you could plant something. Perhaps you could save your leaves for the spring after terminating the rye and add those atop as a mulch. I find personally that leaves do very little breaking down over the winter, so it would probably be relatively simple to just add them later on and then let the cover crops do a lot of the replenishing of the soil for you. These are chopped up leaves from a year ago, and they're still like the underneath is starting to get broke down, but there's still a fair amount of dry leafiness. Mulches do ultimately turn into some amount of fertility, so having a combination of mulches and cover crops as it makes sense for your planting schedule will help a lot on the fertility front. And then also potentially adding some compost extracts and slurry to help keep the microbes lively. You also, of course, have the option of things like organic alfalfa meal that can be relatively affordable as a fertilizing option, especially on that amount of space. You can ask the supplier, but 5 to 10 pounds will do you like a 4x8 bed for a year. You can even get a soil test to see exactly how much of what meal you should be adding, depending on how productive you need those beds to be. Like I said, I know sometimes we wish we had raised beds for certain crops that we will sometimes plant, but then they get neglected and eventually buried or mowed or whatever. I would love to have rosemary, thyme, sage, and various other culinary and medicinal herbs around the house for ourselves. And sometimes I feel like a raised bed would help me to divide them from the garden space and give them slightly more attention, or the amount of attention they actually need. But either way, I feel like having the raised bed would give them a small chance. Anyway, fun Thursday, you all. Thanks as always for the great Patreon questions, and thanks as always for the video submissions. Please keep those coming. Just a 20-second, hey, what's up clip showing one crop or plant you are proud of. I really loved that pepper one. That was really cool. Or just your harvest or garden or whatever you want to show off. We'd love to see it. Send it to farmermike@no-tillgrowers.com. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn about how to contribute over at the show notes, which is probably down, maybe over, I don't know. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat like this one or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of July at the death, you will get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to, you like how I threw a soccer reference in there? Tommy Kisser. Yeah. All right, so returning to our small town in Pennsylvania where Pizza Farm and Burger Farm are squaring off, the pranks continue and they grow. Burger Farm, for instance, built a catapult to occasionally launch burgers at Pizza Farm. Pizza Farm put up a sign in their front yard that real big that just says Burger Farm listens to slow jazz. Just continues, and it goes back and forth, and the townspeople are literally and figuratively, I guess, eating it up. They have their Burger Farm shirts or Pizza Farm hats, and they show their loyalty to their favorite. The two farms become friendly over this because, you know, business is good and it's fun, and both families are at a local event one night when a neighbor calls the Pizza Farm dad and says, there has been a new prank. The pizza oven has been moved across the street and is sitting in front of the Burger Farm. This, to Pizza Farm, was a step too far. So he confronts Burger Farm, but Burger Farm folks just look absolutely stunned. That, they say, was definitely not us. Who was it? Well, that is for tomorrow on the Fight for Food Town. I actually kind of like that one. All right. Thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you then. Bye.